Welcome to the first episode of Back Issues with Marco and Eric Hurd. We will be covering direct edition comics. This was a brainchild kind of Eric's, I think. Back Issues in general. He used to hit me up when I'd say something random on other shows and go like, hey, I kind of feel like talking about direct, right? What was it? You want to talk about direct comics, Eric? I can't remember exactly how it happened.
Yeah, we were. I think you were talking about directs in general about them coming into 79, 80,
Oh, the
81, and all that kind of
distribution
stuff.
wars. Yeah, after the distribution wars.
And then
Yeah.
it spurred my brain up on what was not really what the first directs were, but the first directs with the Spidey corner box.
Yeah, which was a random question. It's not the first direct overall. It's the Spidey box. And you said, what is your opinion on that? And I said, well, it's still extremely low, but that would be something interesting to dig in. And I think over the next year, we just really started kind of just kept hitting back up. I mean, you did a ton of the digging for it, but I did everything I could.
Well, at first you did a lot of it. And then, I kind of dove into it as well and just figured out when it happened, what month, how many there were, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think a lot of it though was just like back memory for me. I know you did, and you verified a lot of stuff, and I know I got some of the stuff wrong because of that. But either way, so we're gonna get into this one. We're probably gonna do some more of these. Give us ideas if there's stuff you want to hear. It's not about new stuff mainly. It's kind of like about the history or just like chit chatting. These are like the stories people tell too when you're sitting in the con with some of the vets there when they're traveling around. So we might actually even get into the distribution wars because I know that's something interesting. But really quickly, just for the people out there that aren't that familiar with the direct edition didn't start till like the late 70s, 79-ish is kind of I think where they're sitting it there. Before that, publishers, all they had were newsstands. So there's a couple things with that. You could return it for credit if you didn't sell it. And they'd either do overspray on that or they'd cut off. Sometimes it just depends. Like sometimes you could do the whole book. Some of them would want you just to cut off the label type. Some would just have overspray on it and you'd send it back in. They weren't ordered according to demand. It was just a flat rate that the distributor would process those out. And both serious and casual collectors obtained copies of identical books. I kind of took this from a GPA thing and we'll get into it later. It's kind of just a summary of what newsstand editions were back then. We're not really going to get into the 79. We're going to get more into this period. So a lot of people think of newsstands of the picture on the right over here. And that's kind of how it was, or you saw kids reading it while they're sitting on newspapers. But realistically, by the point we're going to talk about in the 80s, newsstands was a little bit different. As you can see from the picture on the left, there actually is wood. I wish I could have expanded this a little bit, but like this was in a drugstore. There's similar ones to this. I remember this in the 80s where they'd actually have it on mag racks, and everybody's always like, oh, the mag racks destroyed them all the time. No, there was spinner racks, don't get me wrong, but spinner racks a lot of times had either what they consider the more childrenish books or, in my experience, or like the back issues where the up and coming issues for that month or the next month coming in or the next quarter would go onto the magazines with just a corner fold over. Just so that people get kind of a mindset too of where we're at, because I know there is always this misconception that all newsstands came in a like the old school twine wrapping and then were just jammed into whatever was available, right, Eric? I mean, I think that's what people kind of, because they're always like, oh, they're always destroyed so much, but realistically it wasn't much difference then, because you'd find those comic racks in comic book stores, so it wasn't much difference than that. The main guy that kind of changed the game for direct was Phil Sealing. This is a great picture of Phil Sealing. He actually kind of looks like this a lot. Sometimes he gets a ponytail. He's a comic book guy. I think he actually was an artist in comics. He also ran one of the cons. He did the con circuit too, but he ended up starting Seagate. And maybe I'm not gonna get too much into Seagate, but Seagate pretty much was the first deal, the first distributor. There was a lot of stuff that some people didn't like. A lot of people were not particularly fond in the industry of him, the direct or people that own comic shops, because they thought he had a monopoly on it. That's for a whole different episode. You can choose your own opinion on that one later, but that's the guy who started directs. And then there was the first was obviously the same barcode, but there was a little bit of an issue with returning, because with newsstands, you could return them for the price back and credit. Some comic book, less scrupulous, I guess, comic store owners would do that because the barcode was the same. So they installed the slash barcode. But I think the main barcode that Eric wants to talk about is the middle barcode here, Eric, right?
Yeah, that's the one that came out in February of '80.
In February of '80. That's a Spider-Man one.
Yep.
So we'll get into some of this stuff too. And just to kind of give you a point of view, and we'll talk about this chart a little bit more later, but around that area, we're looking at, in the 10 to 15 percentile of books were actually direct market. So it's actually way lower than the newsstand is kind of like the best guesstimates for that type of error there. Okay, go ahead. What do we got here?
Yeah. In February of '80, there were 8 comics that were direct editions, and we're going to go through them one by one here just to let you guys know. And on the left, you'll see the newsstand, and then on the right, we'll have the direct. And first one we got is She-Hulk #1. Second one we have is Battlestar Galactica #12. The next one is King Size Annual Star Wars #1. Fantastic Four 215. Iron Man #131. Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man 39.
Schizo. And by the way, this is the one where he gets like the lizard costume breaks through too. But Schizoid is a terrible, absolutely terrible villain. Just a side note real quickly.
True. And What If Spider-Man, I think that's 19, correct?
Yeah, and that's the one where he becomes a TV show host or whatever. Right? That's not he's wearing a cape, but it's not the Doctor cape. All right.
And then we had Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos #156.
Mm-hmm. That is actually, I will tell you this about this book. The Spider-Man logo, we double and triple checked to make sure it actually was, because it's very, very hard to find the direct edition of this copy as far as we could. I mean, we scoured this for a while, so I think.
And we even looked on the GPA numbers, and what did we find? 2?
2, yep.
2 that are actually graded copies of this book.
Yeah. So it's that's if you want to hunt something hard, maybe we talk to Pete about that. Add it to that Go series that he's got. All right.
And we kind of went down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out of these 8, which were the first to come out, because it says February 1980, but it doesn't give. And Marco, you can tell, go down this road a little bit better than I can, but they give you a month, but they don't actually give you like a week when these books dropped.
Okay, so this so this is the 2 parts, and this is kind of why we brought up sealing in the first place. At that point, if you were closer to the printer, you got your books first. Mm-hmm. And the publisher had shipped it out, and that's kind of what some of the lawsuits were. But even after the publisher shipping it out, you still got your books first. And as far as newsstand versus direct, a lot of times the distributor for the newsstand had what their schedule was, because you couldn't hit up all your regional distribution areas. Like, let's say that your distributor had 20 drugstores, it had 30 to 100 newsstands. It wasn't like you see on the TV where they're in a truck and they just drive down a street and they throw some newspapers out the back. Mm-hmm. They literally had to go to all these places and service them too.
And so in that time period, I mean, you had your East Coast, which was your New Jersey, and then you had your Midwest, which was Illinois, Chicago, I believe.
Yeah, so by this time they started having regional distribution too. But you're talking about for the newsstand, yes, they already had regional distribution there too. But the thing printed out of the same area, so it printed out in Illinois for it. So, I mean, you started getting regional printers at that point because after the lawsuit, they had, it made it easier. I mean, I think that's getting too deep into the mud of how printing works. But this is before Giuseppe with Capital kind of turned everything into Diamond and took over all this, which he took over Seagate too eventually. And that was part of the reason, like they were getting comics before everybody else. So like your news date and your cover date didn't actually mean the date that it was on the street. Is that fair to address there? Because your
that's pretty much what we've discovered in most of these, because I think what we have on here is like Marvel release date would have been the date it was put through the printer, I would assume. And then cover date is when they were actually going to put it on release. They're supposed
to, that's the date that book has to be. It has to be on the stand at that date.
But like you were saying, it's almost impossible to verify if they put them out a week
Well,
early, that week, a
I mean,
week
I'm not
later.
trying to besmidge the time or the businessmen that were there, but like, there's a reason why the logo changed, the UPC code changed, because the comic store owners were sending we're sending in the discounted direct editions and getting full refunds for the newsstand editions. And this is
Yep.
one of the reasons why we have the Spider-Man thing. So if you're telling me that maybe a guy, a distributor who had gotten the comics ahead of time, and that book would go there, there wasn't Wednesdays. It wasn't Comic Book Wednesday. You know what I mean? There was no Wednesday warring back then. It was, you're supposed to roughly put it out in that time with your distribution. And by the way, if you're distributing, you're not hiring somebody to go to 1 or 2 shops. You know what I mean? Because they're so far away. Like, you're hiring that person. They're not doing every shop on the same day. They're going to drop off to whatever your area is, and then they go to the next area the next day, and the next area the next day, and the next area the next day. And they did routes. I mean, it's not as logistically, I guess, planned as it is now, you know, where I think they give you a GPS locator to do distribution, and you only make right turns, but you have to remember, you know, that made it faster also, right? So like, let's say that your guy at I pay you right away drugstore is got his bills up to date. You're going to give him his comic books first, where even if the other guy's closer at I'm a jerk, he's going to get last dip at it. So there you go. That's just how it was. Yep. So, but there was 2 that we kind of drilled down and got to, right?
Yeah, and I don't know how many people were looking at the dates on that, but go back one real quick, and we'll just.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, yep.
And if you look at the release dates on these, I mean, which we consider probably when they came off the press and were packaged or whatever else.
Packaged.
You've got a lot of November 27 79s and a couple the next week, which was December 4th 79. But then if you go over,
because of plate changing,
you can see what the cover dates were. And then on the other 2 that we have here, which from everything we've dug through, we think it's one of these 2 books is the first direct edition Spidey corner box. Now, of course, we don't.
It's the annual. Yeah, I mean, I think when we come down to these 2, we do think it was the annual that came first, right?
We do. I do believe so.
Yeah.
I mean, you have the cover dates are different,
right?
But the cover date on the original annual is from December of 79. And it actually didn't come out, until February of 80. So I do believe that was the first one they pushed out because of when it was supposed to come out and when it actually did hit the street.
Yeah. I mean, that's where the question comes into play. Like, how do you have a cover date that's printed before you actually release the book?
And I think even if you look on the direct edition, it says, I think vertically, where you have the loot box right below the price, I think it says $12.79 or $19.79 in that box.
Yeah, it does. But that's where it also comes in, because you know they were planning the release of She-Hulk 2, but these were the 2, shall we say, like stars of the era at this time that we thought was, because it wasn't in the middle of the run, it was an annual that was coming out, and annuals had a tendency to come out irregularly, shall we say, where number 1s would kind of have a push. But either way, these 2 seem to be, from everything we could read, a lot of times you saw them in pictures that we saw and everything else of them on stands at the same time around that period. So it's very possible that these came out the same week and a week earlier than the other books. So, but then again, you know what would have happened, because it is a new character. Once again, now this is 100% speculation, and I'm not saying this for sure, but because these would have been more popular titles too, especially a number 1 coming out in that case, new character in it, and Star Wars, which at the time is smoking hot. When we talked about coming off printers first and stuff ending up, you know, if you're closer or you're more friendly with your distributor, or Seagate, if you're closer to Illinois at this point, you know what I mean? Like, you know, you're starting to get the other guys in here, but like Shooter's still trying to get the break to have the lawsuit, right? So you're still looking at, if you're friends with Sealing and you're close to Illinois, these books were probably to you a lot faster than, like, let's say if you're in on the West Coast or down south.
Probably Florida,
California, Florida. Yeah. So like these probably could come, you get them ahead of time because it's not coming in a package. So And it was sent to you from the publisher, so they need to clear space too. So
Yep.
that's the case with those. All right. So, yep. Is there anything you'd like to add to that point?
It's just to me, it's an intriguing topic. I mean, especially when it was the first time they, changed over to the Spidey logo on the direct editions, and then and the amazing thing, and in that time period, how many titles did they have per month usually? Like 20 to 30?
Yeah, I mean, coming out of Marvel, yeah, it'd have to be around there.
And then the funny thing is that they only picked 8 titles to do this with, and that was the other thing. It was kind of funny, just sporadically which titles they picked for it, etc.
So that was part of it too. The Spider box wasn't. They were actually supposed to give people an option to draw what the box was going to come out with, and I think the Spidey box was the best looking out of it. I don't know exactly. I'd have to look into it a little bit more, but this is just going off memory. If I remember correctly, they were supposed to let artists draw what they wanted in the boxes, and Spider-Man kind of took what it was, and I think it was through the transition because they were trying to figure out what they could do between that, and you're going to have the Whitman problem coming up here, right? And then you had to figure out how you could still get the scan in.
What also makes sense is it would be Spider-Man because it was the highest selling title at that point in time.
True.
I think in 80 it was like almost 300K was the print run on it. And I think most every other superhero title around there was like 200K.
So that's probably how they got the winner there, Spider-Man being in the corner. So, but yeah, I mean that's what it was, and these two sure seem to be the winner. Now, listen, I'm telling you though, the hardest book to get. Once again, if we go back, I mean, this is the hardest book to find with the Spider-Man logo.
100%.
I think without a doubt. Without a doubt, probably that's just going to be the toughest. The What If, I don't think it's going to be the toughest. But any of them,
I went through these on the census, and I think that Sergeant Fury was definitely the lowest. And
by far.
I don't remember. There was a couple other ones that only had between 20 and 30 books on the census.
Well, this is the problem. This is the problem with them too. People aren't thinking of direct as that rare at this time, for one. And for I don't think. I mean, I know you're hunting for the spiders, and there's a very small niche group that has done that before, but you aren't thinking that this is making up like 10 to 12% of the total book population, right? At this point, like a lot of people don't think that offhand, so they're not creating it.
Because if you think about it, we were talking about 300,000 being the high end run for Spider-Man. And the average superhero title was 200,000. Then, I mean, how do you think Sergeant Fury was printing out?
Probably
75 to 100?
Probably not in the 80s. Probably not. Yeah, probably not more than 1,500, 1,000. I mean,
and then you think about 10% of the full run. I mean, it's gonna be hard to find that book.
You got to think too. Like that's just at the break where he's not trying to lose his monopoly on direct editions, right? Like, so yeah, there's a small uptick. It's not like 2% anymore, but like it's not a 50-50 break. It's so I mean, like there's only so much coming out from him, and then like where's he actually sending it out to? You know what I mean? If you're And I guess I'll get into a little bit later because it's one of the people who now, one of the winners in this whole thing, now puts out his own report and it kind of bashes, Seagate and everything else and what the numbers were and makes himself feel more important. But those who win the wars win history, they get to write history. So, but when you're thinking about it, like he wasn't exactly sharing the wealth at this point. So there was very few. And in the Midwest and in the upper East Coast, is Sergeant Fury killing it in the 80s? You see what I'm saying?
No, because wasn't this at the end of the run?
Yeah.
Because I don't remember what it went to, but it wasn't. They didn't go another year in this run, did
they? I mean, like it's just not killing it, right? Like the Spider-Man titles are killing it. Iron Man, it's doing okay. There's a little Hulk crossover there.
Yeah.
Fantastic Four was doing decent, but I mean, actually Fantastic Four was doing pretty good at the time. Star Wars was huge.
Yep.
Battlestar Galactic.
I think Battlestar might have been the second fewest one on the census.
Yeah, it is, and it's not. Well, it definitely is not winning the sci-fi awards during that time period.
No.
And the She-Hulk new character, You know, it's good writers, very attractive covers for young men, and you know, I mean, hey, that's what it was about in the 80s. So that's where you get it. You get, you know, Peter Parker was doing good, and Fury wasn't. Probably the two worst that we were seeing there was Fury and Battlestar Galactic. So I bet you they were both probably the hardest ones. And the other part that affects this is realistically now for the grading, because you're talking about census, something I would like to address is like there's no, besides obviously Savage She-Hulk #1, very minor support characters, nothing huge, no reason for people to grade the majority of these comics.
Yeah, there's really nothing going on in any of these books except for the Savage She-Hulk.
Well, Savage She-Hulk #1, yeah. So I mean, you know, that's part of, and we saw that too as part of the research when we were looking into it, because I'll get into the last part then here if we're done covering these books. Are we done covering the books, or is there something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm good with it. We're good.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're hunting these and you want to do all the Spider ones, I would first start off with hunting Sergeant Fury and Battlestar Galactica, because those two are going to be hard. Sergeant Fury, I mean, virtually impossible getting grades anyways. But I would like to address something real quickly. So what we told you was true from a certain point of view, and the only reason I'm saying that is because we did add this graphic, the GPA graphic. Now, if even the percentages in this graphic over time had changed a little bit, because this was taken from census numbers for GPA for graded copies, complete direct and newsstand graded copies. So that's what they were kind of using this for. The numbers has switched now. The overall percentage wise has gone a little bit down as far as the direct copies in the 82 area, 86. The direct copies there's been more grading of the newsstand at that point, because newsstand has become more popular across the board after 1980, because everybody was under the assumption that direct took over, and so was this. But newsstands, because newsstands got popular, you started seeing more newsstands in off grades, because at this point all they were doing were grading really extremely high newsstands, like 9.6s, not 9, and pretty much from 9.2 up. And now you start to see more recently in the last 5 years everything from like 6.0s being graded. So the numbers have actually gone up as far as newsstands across the board here, and the percentages difference has gone down. That is not to say that after 86 direct, I mean, like when you're talking about 86, directs really start to take a huge spike. There is one other I would like to address, another one. A lot of people see this graphic all the time. This graphic was done by one of the winners of the distribution wars, and it was not Seagate. And this person had in my opinion, had a very good reason to make it seem, when he's telling his story, that he influenced the difference between the direct and newsstand market. So I would just say the data is very sketch on this one, and just take it for what it is. If you see it, obviously you guys can find out where this one's from by itself, and nothing against the person who did this or what he says his store has done for the comic book industry, because it is very important. But do remember, the victors get to write the history books, and he was the victor. So to make the other guy look bad in the direct, in the newsstand direct market probably is it. And his importance a little bit greater, which his importance was great. Either.
And I don't think we'll ever get an exact number on this.
We're never going to,
just because of the way people kept records.
Well,
and lack of records.
Yeah, well, this is it too. Like his big thing is like, well, I kept records. Well, you did, but where you're located is so far away from like where direct edition and like newsstand, like you're so far away from it. And in your area, they were so vast in their area, right? So like he's the leader of his regional area, and he's a direct seller. So the amount of books that he's going to see and get back in are obviously going to be direct books, because he was it. He was the king dingaling. I mean, where when you start going into the other areas where it was a little bit more sparse, or like distribution was a little bit more even, or there wasn't as big of a influential comic book store early on, I guess, like you're obviously, it makes common sense, like you're not going to see as many direct market books if there's no comic book stores within 100 miles of most major cities. Where yeah, this guy is in a major city and expanded 100 miles. I mean, he's very high up there. Let's put it that way. And he's been around for a very long time. So just take all these little charts with a grain of salt. That, you know what I mean? When you start digging down and you start looking at stuff, the numbers are close, but they're not like.
I think it's a good ballpark, but none of these are set in stone.
Well, I mean, you know, the year he could start selling direct, obviously, of course, the year they won, all of a sudden direct market went 50-50, right? Like, of course it did, because you did that. So like now all of a sudden it's 50-50, right? Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Anyways, well, thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed. I want to thank Eric on this. I'm sorry that we didn't get this out sooner. I know he's been bugging me to do it, but if you have any suggestions, leave them below. And maybe there's another topic we'd like to talk about or whatever. And if not, we'll probably come up with something.
Yeah. Do we want to give the option, like if they want to ask us questions and there's stuff we didn't cover, we'd come back and do a little
absolutely.
Q&A?
Put it in the comments below. This is a tape show, so put them in the comments below. When you do that, we will highlight the questions, or we'll do whatever, and maybe even just do a recap on that. Once again, I hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.